أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters, and a warm welcome to our non-Muslim guests in the audience today. So as the MC mentioned, this talk is titled Islam, the Origin of Women's Liberation. This topic that we're going to address today comes at a time where Islam generally and Muslim women specifically have made headlines. And I don't know how else to exaggerate that, but we know it. Oppressed, inferior to men, deprived of identity, forced by the Sharia, treated as second-class citizens and cut off from social life are just about a few of the labels and imagery which have been stamped onto the minds of people when they think of the lives of Muslim women. Ideas implanted by opportunistic politicians and further reinforced by the media. In a climate where Muslims face an uphill struggle in maintaining their Islamic identity and protecting its fundamental aspects of faith, we still find that here, even in Western societies, that people are interested in Islam and some of them are even embracing and converting into Islam. I know that yesterday there was a reverts panel, people discussing and explaining their journeys to Islam. And also, a growing number of women, Muslim women, are proudly and defiantly wearing the hijab and the jilbab or even the niqab, despite the liberal environments these women live in. And what is apparent is that when we do delve into the discourse of all things to do with women's liberation or gender equality, is that the success and the progress of women has only been measured by the Western secular liberal yardstick. And subhanAllah, when I was asked to do this talk, I thought, I love the title of the talk. It was I find it so suitable to what we're trying to aim and propose for today, because essentially what we are hoping to do today is to take a step forward and to shift the discussion into a new direction. We are not here to simply discuss Muslim women within the parameters that already exist, but we are here to propose and open up an idea that, despite all the noise that government policies and media try to make, that Islam poses as the only viable and contending alternative system which will champion the rights of not just Muslim women, but for all women. Islam is not just a set of golden rules to live by. It's not just a belief for myself alone and no one else. But Islam also has within it the ability to address issues and problems that societies and nation states alike will face. From the individual spiritual actions to matters to do with economics or even education, to name a few, Islam is comprehensive in every sense of that word. Islam doesn't measure things according to gender, class or race. There's no classifications of this within Islam. And as such, it will champion for the rights of all humanity. And that really, as Muslims, sometimes when we're in our circles, whether it be in university environments or at the workplace, sometimes we get a bit, shy or soft when it comes to talking about what Islam is, or when an issue comes up on the news, you kind of just sort of take the, that kind of approach. But for far too long, we've been like this. You don't, as Muslims, take that, feel confident in your religion, in your belief, to speak up about the fact that Islam does afford a great status and many rights and security for women as a holistic system. Its textual evidences and its rich history is testimony to this fact. And it does not stop there. Islam, as we will see later on in my talk, did not just come to liberate women and the people at that specific time of which it was revealed to, but it still has relevance today and beyond, to offer security and solutions to problems facing women all over the world. And certainly I can tell that all the Muslims here would vouch for that. So the question that needs to be at the center of this discussion shouldn't be, does Islam oppress women, or let's call for Islam to have a women's interpretation of the laws, or a feminist reading of Islam, so that, Islam can progress and, advance some sort of women's rights movement. No, these shouldn't be the questions that needs to be asked when we're dealing with Muslim women or women's rights in general. But rather, we should be asking which system and belief can and will protect the dignity and rights of women. Is it current day secular liberalism, which we see rife and adopted by many countries all over the world, or is it Islam? So I really want this to sort of be at the heart or the foundation of approaching this topic today. Now, perhaps, this could be, almost like a surprise to say that, that Islam champions women's rights, and it's, news. But given that without a doubt, the reality facing Muslim women, whether in the Muslim world or even here in various Western countries, Muslim women and their reality is a dark one. Some of them are afflicted with so many problems, whether it is, from forced marriages to honor killings to acid attacks, and, be it, the lack of access to education or healthcare. And because this is an undeniable reality, I won't say it doesn't exist and it doesn't happen to Muslim women. But, whether we hear these reports from the media, somehow we immediately accept the equation that Islam, with its Sharia law and values, are behind such actions. But even if we simply, pause for a second, take a brief study of the rules in Islam, it would highlight that such actions have no basis within Islamic texts, and are in fact something which Islam is quite against. These practices, whatever they may be, result from non-Islamic tribal or traditional cultural practices from particular communities and, their cultures. And unfortunately, in the worst cases, these practices are given credibility because some people have distorted their understanding of these Islamic evidences to justify their actions, and these traditions just harm women. In addition, these practices have been able to flourish and survive by the dictatorial regimes that currently plague the Muslim world and care little for the rights of any of their citizens. These governments have turned a blind eye to the heinous traditional customs, allowing for such crimes to go unchecked and unpunished. Furthermore, these governments have also instigated injustices themselves to women. Rape victims languish in jails. Women face dire poverty, poor access to education, basic services like healthcare, employment opportunities, and lack to no political rights whatsoever. But just because these despotic regimes appear to have a Muslim face, a Muslim flavor, happen to have a significant Muslim population, and when these crimes are enacted, Islam has been judged as the culprit because of that equation. Yet again, in examining the ruling structures of these countries, looking at the laws and the constitutions of these so-called Muslim countries, we find them to be either monarchies or, secular dictatorships or republics. They're not essentially an Islamic Sharia state. And, therefore, these ruling structures are at complete odds with what the Islamic ruling system is, because of the very idea that they put sovereignty of law at the hands of human beings and not the creator God. And so it becomes imperative that when we do look at these realities, we should be looking at not just the reality at face value and take it as it is, and look at what actually supports the continuation of these problems. And since this discussion is looking at how Islam is the origin of women's liberation, we'll jump onto a time machine, if that's possible, to look at what the conditions and what society was like, and that is about 1400 years ago, to see, and so that we can understand how Islam was so revolutionary in its ideas and laws that it became the beacon of not just women's rights, but how it was a belief and a system which was out to challenge and change the norms of the societies it was around in that time, and I will argue also beyond. So yeah, for the purposes of sticking to the theme of the talk, we will just focus on what the status of women was like before Islam, to understand and paint a picture of life, what life was like for her. So we're going to be taking into consideration the socio-economic and political context that surrounded her. So, and I'm really sorry that I don't have slides. I realized that after I wrote the talk, I should have had presentation slides, but you're just going to have to put imagination caps and try and picture Arabia in 1400 years ago. Okay, so the life of women generally during those times for women in Arabia and even like the bordering countries around, it was one that, you know, depending on what kind of status, what kind of tribe you came from, what kind of class you came, like what class you were in society, it would be different. The treatment you'd receive would be very different. So for example, if she was from a tribe that was from a wealthy and strong and powerful family, and that particular family actually chose to honor their women and actually respect their women, then the whole tribe will defend her honor, and therefore she would receive a considerable portion of free will. And due to that honor and respect she used to receive, sometimes wars would ensue because of her. And in other words, she was the most decisive key to a bloody fight or a friendly peace. And although this was the case for these particular women, in general as a society, the structure remained patriarchal in nature. And this was felt throughout all levels of society. This was what the tribal political system was dependent upon. So the leadership of it, the leadership had rested upon the older members of the clan who were men. Most of her affairs were, you know, approved by her legal guardians. So for example, in matters of marriage, it was not for her to decide who she married. It was in the hands of her legal guardian, be it her father or the actual leader of the tribe. And she could not question or have a say in that marital arrangement which he has organized for her. But marriages were not the only types of relationships that existed. Other depraved relationships occurred, more often affected women who were of lower standing and from weaker tribes. And even worse, the reality for women who were slaves. One particular relationship was, for example, where a man, and he usually came from a weaker tribe, he would send his own wife to cohabit with another man who came from a sort of more stronger, wealthier tribe, so that maybe she could conceive a child from that relationship, and therefore that child they had this mentality of that he could then inherit that, you know, those good, strong qualities from that tribe, because they were the Arabs at the time, they valued very much the idea of lineage and bloodline. So that was one type of relationship. And he can choose whether to keep that child or even keep his own wife. He could even just not keep her again. Things like that. Also, another type of relationship was that a woman, she would actually be in a relationship with 10 men or less simultaneously and consecutively. And if she happens to fall pregnant from this relationship, she'll gather all the men together, and then she gets to decide who the father is, and no one has a say in that decision, and whoever she's chosen, he will then have to take responsibility for that child. And the last particular category is where women are kept in brothels, which would be owned by the rich noblemen of society, and this would be a means for the tribal leaders to earn an income and also entertain any of their guests. Also, on the other side of things, men were able to actually marry as many women as they wanted to. There was no system, there was no structure, there were no rules in terms of who they couldn't marry, in terms of who was they able to marry, and there was no even guidance as to how they can even treat the woman. And more often than not, during those times, they just saw women as properties to inherit, to gain, so that they can take her assets and so on and so forth. So really, they really viewed women as commodities. So to further add to this picture, other societal norms included gambling, the production and consumption of alcohol, it was widespread then, slavery, although I might add to a side note, it wasn't just particularly in Arabia, it was, at that time there were other empires like the Roman Empire, the Persian Empire. Slavery was widespread during these times. Also, common factors of the society was also female infanticide, which is, the bearing of young children, particularly girls. Although again, not widespread, but it was a practice that maybe weaker tribes would do. Also, these people were very religious people. They believed and they practiced idol worship. So they were, you know, very superstitious. They relied heavily on fortune telling in order to decide what to do, what not to do. So this is their sort of the spiritual side of things. And also, poetry was a revered form of entertainment. On the whole, poverty, hunger, and insufficient clothing were the prevailing economic features of Arabia. And as such, when Islam was revealed through the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the various facets of life, be it the economic situation, or the social practices, or the personal beliefs that these people held onto, were to be challenged and questioned. A message that was revealed to shake the very foundations of families, tribes, and also empires. Not only was his message one that moved the hearts from the reverence of idols and the blind following of laws and desires of men to the worship of the one creator who created the universe and everything in it, giving them and us the correct tools and methods to come to terms with the existence of the creator, but he fundamentally came with a message to manifest this worship and obedience of God by challenging the very structures that society run by men had put in place to liberate all people, all human beings, men and women, from the shackles of man-made oppression to the servitude of the divine power of God, leaving all affairs and all laws to the Creator alone to decide. So when Islam says, people are equal as the teeth of a comb, they are differentiated only by piety, then Islam is promoting notions of equality, and the distinction between people is given to a value, a characteristic which encourages good morals and closeness to the Creator. Or when Islam says, paradise lies under the feet of the mother, then Islam is elevating the position of motherhood as not just another task in life, but a rewarding role which will bear its fruit when she raises men and women who will honor and love her. And with this, we see Islam is also emphasizing that a society needs to build strong family bonds, where people will never neglect their parents, whether they are young and healthy or until they reach their old age. Also, when Islam says, the believer who has the most perfect faith is the one whose behavior is the best, and the best of you are those who are best to their women, then Islam is saying and commanding all people to be fair and respectful in their treatment and conduct with women, who have a role with them in all aspects of life, and thus closing the gates to exploitation or oppression of women. These are just a few of the many revolutionary statements that Islam has to offer. Statements such as these inspired the hearts and minds of many women to liberate themselves from the empty worship of idolatry and the dictates of man-made law to the worship and submission of the Creator of all men and women. So when Islam says this, are these not ideas which challenge the status quo and offer a better solution to the problems that were rife for women? Is this not an action which holds to account the evil and vice practices that occur in their society and system which supports it, a society whose actions controlled and dictated by man? And as such, to restore the true honor and protection of the rights of women must have. This is the Islam that made nations embrace its ideas, laws and values in droves. The first person to embrace it was a woman, the Prophet's wife Khadija radiallahu anha. And the first person to be martyred holding on to her faith while in the face of torture by her master was a woman, Sumayya radiallahu anha. Women were at the forefront of the message of Islam, whether they were inviting their family and friends to it or whether they were beside the men on the battlefields. Women were empowered by Islam and its values. Women found protection of their dignity and their rights because of Islam and its laws, laws by which no man can strip away from her, because at the foundation of these body of laws is the very idea of being aware and conscious of the Creator, seeking paradise and the reward of which is the reward which He has promised all who are faithful. The rights prescribed to women within the Islamic texts are clear. The right to education, employment, to vote, political participation, choice in marriage, the right to divorce, the rights of citizenship are all on par with the men in society. And importantly, the right to respect and protection of her life and her honor, these are rights that are afforded to both genders in Islam. The manner in which Islam was revealed meant that women or any other member in society did not need to call for reformation or protest their way to ensure that they receive these rights. Because in Islam, we don't believe that Islam needs to be reformed. We believe that Islam has come completely with all its details pertaining to life. And so we can find that in history, the history of Islam, there wasn't any record of, people being truly unhappy and, with the laws and, the values that Islam imbued. Unlike Western societies, where women often had to battle the system to secure their rights, the rights afforded to women in the societies of Islamic history were dependent upon Islamic rule, protected by an Islamic system of governance. And only when the application of this system weakened, or worse still, was removed in 1924, then these rights could not be guaranteed, and women fell prey to the grave injustices that we see today. Many women worldwide would therefore argue that it has been the absence of Islam that the Muslim world is in so much strife. While Islam does not define matters by gender or class or race, however, Islam does recognize and appreciate the differences between the genders and addresses their needs accordingly. For example, because that Islam does have a specific aim and a specific type of society that it hopes to build, Islam places in high esteem the protection of building strong family units, and thus defines a specific responsibility for the man as a breadwinner, for want of a better word, to his family, and the responsibility of the woman as a homemaker and nurturer of their children. This is clearly set out in Islam, but at the same time, it does not in any way strip the woman of her ability to choose work if she wants to do that. And one would really be naive to think that Islam would exclude women from society and from this sphere. But it must be noted that because Islam does acknowledge that her primary role is that of a nurturer, all steps will be taken first with the support of a state, that to ensure that her main responsibility is first fulfilled without it being compromised in any way. And I found this very interesting, subhanAllah, like when, rereading into your own beliefs and values, that, if a woman does, gain any wealth, whether it be through personal work or inheritance, her own to be spent as she wishes, with no obligation to finance any family needs. The man, however, is obliged to spend his earnings and any inheritance to not only financially maintain his wife, children, or any other female relatives, which is a stark contrast to the modern woman, where if she does, work, most of it, if not all of her income, along with the man's income, is to be distributed to pay for day-to-day expenses, from the bills and to the demanding lifestyle choices. So Islam seeks to secure a society with specific values. This is the Sharia that needs to be viewed as a whole, and not as laws cut off and isolated from each other and then viewed separately from the body of the laws, and then without any scholarly understanding or consideration, examined under a microscope with a secular liberal lens. Appreciating Islam and its values and laws needs to be done so by its own merit, and to look at the manner in which it treats all its citizens, by understanding their needs as human beings and what type of society it aims to achieve, not by measuring parts of Islam's laws against another system with a completely different set of values and laws which are based on something completely different, for example, freedom or secularism, where it might appear that that particular law just does not match up. What we need to look into is what type of society Islam aims to achieve, and certainly Islam does not believe in this notion of freedom or liberalism or secularism, and as such, we do not believe in securing individual freedoms, but aim instead to protect other values in society, values such as chastity, honor, and respect of men and women alike, strong marriages and strong family units. It also believes in the cooperation of both men and women within society, in fields of education, economics, politics, and societal life in general. It does not simply look at what will ensure maximum pleasure for individuals within society, but what is best for the harmony and safety and respect for the community as a whole. What is so appealing and unique about Islam is that it places the confidence of the laws and obedience to them in the belief that to obey them and to live by them surpasses any other law that a human can conjure, because it is a law that the Creator, who knows his creation best, as how one should conduct themselves in life. And as such, we find tranquility and reward in such actions. It elevates the ordinary and mundane to something that is beyond this world and into pleasing the Creator alone. While we see in the present day debate on women's liberation or gender equality, there's this pattern of repetitive and predictable arguments that are used against Muslim women and her values, whether they spit the same rhetoric that Muslim women are either oppressed because of how Islam has restricted her freedoms, or the other example that Islam discriminates against women because particular laws are at odds with gender equality. We really see these as not a genuine concern for the welfare of women. Rather, like, these arguments really, they have nothing to do with ensuring the rights of Muslim women or, emancipating her from Islam. Or they're not even sincere attempts to have an open dialogue with Muslims to see what, your values are and what the laws are in Islam pertaining to women. But rather, I will argue that these initiatives and these ideas are attached to the very same notion when back in 2001, where former US President George W. Bush proclaimed that one of the reasons to invade Afghanistan was in order to liberate the women of color. And similarly, this same idea was more recently stated by former President Nicolas Sarkozy, where the ban for the niqab and burqa was not an issue of religion, but a question of women's freedom and dignity. See, but the thing is, the truth unveils itself, and because truly these messages are not seen, like the truth unfolds itself in a manner where we do not see this sincere or genuine, benefit or protection for Muslim women. What are the results now? How has it improved the livelihood of Muslim women to say these statements? Let's talk to a woman in Afghanistan and see how the bringing of democracy by the tanks and the bomb and the gunfire has changed for her. What are the results for saying these statements? So I would argue that these aren't for the benefit and protection for the Muslim woman and her rights to be secured, but rather these are excuses and justifications used as a means to advance political and strategic interests. Both men and women are enjoyed with the same responsibilities in Islam: to raise the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to call people to Islam, to enjoin the good and forbid the evil, as we saw in that beautiful verse in the Quran, from the Quran in the beginning of the talk. And at the same time, Islam recognizes the given realities in order to fulfill such tasks. The concept of women's liberation from the Islamic point of view is not to take the Western secular liberal experience and then apply it to Islam. Rather, Islam and its position on women is the idea that within its very laws and values seeks to protect her rights, her dignity and honor. These things are enshrined in Islam. Arguably, more than ever, Islam needs to be at the forefront in shaping today's landscape with its ideas and values pertaining to women and other facets of life. As I mentioned earlier in my talk, we really need to move away from the initial discussions, the reactionary discussions of, is it true, does Islam oppress women, or is this law such and such, what does this do, what does this mean? We need to move away from these discussions and start heading towards a new direction, to look at, to discuss the idea of what is the best way forward for women, knowing very well as human beings, we are all concerned about how best to live amongst each other, how best to live in a harmonious, peaceful way, a safe way. So, where men and women can live and interact in a harmonious society. And really, it seems as though, this dilemma has not yet been solved. So which way of life, which system can offer this to the woman and secure her rights? Is it the current systems that we see today, be it secular liberalism or otherwise? Or does Islam actually have something unique and relevant to offer? Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.